Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on this rainy afternoon. Today's gathering is the last public program related to Earth Matters, Land as Material and Metaphor in the Arts of Africa, an exhibition of African art created over the last 2 centuries, generously loaned to the Bowdoin Museum by the Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art. The exhibition, sadly, closes on March 6th, and I encourage you to see it if you haven't done so already. For many reasons, a visit to campus by Aimee and Mark Bessire, together with architects Pamela Hawks and Scott Tees, is a perfect way to round out the different conversations that Earth Matters has provoked over the last several months. Their work together in founding Africa Schoolhouse, a nonprofit organization dedicated to bringing quality education to rural villages in northern Tanzania, speaks to the type of transatlantic dialogues between Africa and the United States that I believe will inevitably grow in the years ahead. Not unlike Earth Matters, their work concerns Africa's future in an increasingly global and industrialized world. About our participants, very briefly, because I want to give them time to talk about their project. Aimee Bessire is a visiting associate professor of art and visual culture at Bates College, where she teaches courses in African art and culture, the African diaspora, and cultural and critical theory. With an MA and PhD in art history from Harvard, she has published widely, and in 2013 was the lead curator of the memorable exhibition Shanga, Art of Tanzania, at the Portland Museum of Art. Her husband, Mark Bessire, has served since 2009 as the director of the Portland Museum of Art, where he's overseen, among other things, the renovation of the Winslow Homer Studio in Prouts Neck, has created a dynamic exhibition program that has set attendance and membership records, and has been, for us in the museum world here, the art world here in Maine, a really positive collaborative partner with various institutions, including the Maine College of Art, Portland Space Gallery, and museums around the state of Maine, including Bowdoin. A native New Yorker, Mark knows a fair amount about college museums, having served previously as the director of the Bates College Museum of Art. Joining Aimee and Mark this afternoon are Pamela Hawks and Scott Tees, principal architects at Scattergood Design in Portland, who have worked with the Bessires to bring new schools or to reimagine existing schools in northern Tanzania. Pamela Hawks, native of Maine, was an art major at Williams College before earning graduate degrees in architecture and design from Columbia and Berkeley. She is a national leader in the integration of contemporary design within historic settings, and has directed a variety of award-winning design projects, including Boston Symphony Hall, the Cambridge Public Library, and the Currier Museum of Art in Manchester. Pamela's husband, Scott Tees, is a native of Ohio, though he has spent much of his career here in Maine, working on projects at Colby, the Maine Maritime Academy, and Tom's of Maine. A founder of the Portland Society of Architects, he has participated in Portland's Architects in the Schools program and many community design charrettes. Each of our 2 couples has planned to make a few introductory remarks. Afterwards, we will bring everyone together on stage where we will discuss their work in Tanzania and we'll address questions from the audience. Without further delay, though, please welcome Aimee and Mark Bessire.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much, Frank, and thank Ann and the whole Bowdoin College Museum of Art team. It really is a privilege always to be up at Bowdoin. I think of this as really, if not the premier academic museum in the country. You know, it's one or two, but this is such a phenomenal institution, and we're so fortunate to have it in Maine and to have them as our directors. And I see many of their colleagues here, and you all know all this. And also want to congratulate you on the Earth Matters show, which is just fabulous. And the programming up here at Bowdoin just keeps getting better and better, and thank you for that. So today we're really here to talk about Africa Schoolhouse, and I'm going to give a little bit of just a little bit of an introduction to the area. Tanzania is in Eastern Africa, and I don't have my glasses, so here's the big map of Africa, and so Tanzania is somewhere over here, and some are central, sub-Sahara, sent over here to the east, and this is more helpful, the Indian Ocean, and Lake Victoria and Tanzania is here, and Kenya's to the north, and Uganda's to the north and the west, and it really is a magical, magical part of the world. One of the great things about Tanzania also is that it gained its independence in 1961, and it actually was Tanganyika at that time, and soon after the island of Zanzibar and Tanganyika came together to create Tanzania. And unlike a lot of African countries gaining independence during that period, there was no revolution, there was no battle. It had been a protectorate of the British, and so it was passed over to the people of Tanzania in a peaceful transition in which no cultures were fighting against each other for power. And it has been entirely safe since that time. And even though I would say the same party has won the election for the last 20 years, in the last election, the other party almost won. So there is an oppositional party, and there is elections, and they're free and safe. So in and of itself is actually quite an accomplishment in this part of the world. Thinking about the geography of Tanzania, it could not be a more beautiful place to visit in the entire world. These outcroppings are kopis here, and Lake Victoria being the largest lake in the world. You also have to remember that Zanzibar is on the Indian Ocean, and Mount Kilimanjaro is there. The best coffee in the world is grown in Arusha, fabulous tea, and the Serengeti is there. It is an incredibly rich resource, culturally as well as naturally. So if you do want to visit, we will encourage you at the end to come stay at our visitor's house. Mungawapili was one of where Aimee and I were in Tanzania for 2 years in the mid-90s, and we lived in and around this village, and they were most welcoming to us. And it really was a healing village, which is kind of key to the whole notion of what Africa Schoolhouse is, has to do with healing and education. And this is a very important person to us, and I've got bandages and necklaces and things that still come from Mungawapili that take care of our family. He was an incredible healer. When I was there in the mid-90s, when we were together, I had a Fulbright working on, it's kind of complicated, but I was very interested in learning how indigenous cultures showed their art. So as a Westerner in the West interested in non-Western culture, I needed to learn a little bit more about how indigenous cultures wanted to display their art. And of course, the first thing I recognized was there was really no word for art. So it was very interesting to figure out how in which these cultures wanted to show their art and how the ownership of these objects were. And Aimee, as Frank mentioned, was that doing her dissertation fieldwork, and this is Bulungute, one of the healers that we spent a lot of time with, really thinking about royal and healing traditions in African art and thinking about the past as well as the present. And over those years we spent there, I can't remember exactly the date, in the early 2000s, Aimee went back for a trip to Tanzania to do some research, and it was kind of a miraculous time to be in Tanzania. And one of the things that happened when we were there was that Mungawapili, who you saw on the first slide, had passed away, and Makungote here became the head man of the village, really the leader. And while Aimee was there, they were talking about the need for a school. And so our Africa Schoolhouse really began as an invitation from the local community to assist them in bringing education to their kids and infrastructure for that school. And a big ethos of all the projects we have done is that we do not, and Aimee will talk about this, go in and do projects that are either unnecessary, unwanted, or our ideas. It began with an invitation to participate in a community exercise to create a project where there would be a school for children. And we've always held really strong to that ethos. It's an invitation to us to help. We're not going there to project our needs onto another culture. And I think Aimee is going to now kind of talk about that ethos and how we've carried it through our buildings. Thank you.
I actually want to talk a little bit more about this image, and it was Makungote's request when I was visiting in 2006 on a research trip that led to the development founding of this nonprofit that we had no idea that we would be doing. And at the time when we started this, we really had no idea what we were doing. What was really interesting too, and as I was preparing for today, Mark and I talked a lot about how when we lived in Tanzania for the 2-year period, we had a very, in some ways, a hypercritical academic lens on what some nonprofits were doing in Tanzania. And to be then switched into the position where we wanted to meet the need of these very dear friends who really feel like our family, we wanted to respond when they said, our children have no place to go to school. And this is actually a very, very special healing village, but they said we also need a Western medical clinic. We have people that we are not able to help who are not able to get to the nearest hospital. So I came home just with an absolute yes, let's do this, let's absolutely do this. But we started talking about how do we do this in a way that doesn't fall into the same trap or some of the same issues of some nonprofits that we were seeing that were doing things in some ways from an outside-in approach rather than allowing for the need to come from the community out. And one of the things that became very central to our work was collaboration. And I went back the next year, I began real conversations with the village, many, like sometimes 6 to 8 hour long village meetings, with just sitting around and really helping people talk about like, well, what should this school be? And everything was on the table. It was really fun and sometimes very exhausting brainstorming, but we kept the conversation going. And what I feel very proud of is the way that we really allowed the project to become something that was coming from the voice of the community. And this is actually Teresia Ndaki, who was a government official who, when we began this project in earnest and started collaborating with the government, with our local Tanzanian government district, she became the most amazing community meeting organizer leader. Such a strong, incredible voice, and she would also just energize these meetings and allow that voice of the community to come out. So through collaboration, what was decided through these meetings was that the people in this very rural subsistence farming community did not have the funds for this to be a private school. So this became a government school. The government recognized that need and also became a collaborator in the project and donating the funds for 1 teacher house and 1 classroom. So what began as 100, and here's more collaborations, some more of these meetings. This is everybody in the village. After we'd built the Ntulia Primary School, it was a village meeting inside the school where everyone is saying, yes, we need a clinic. So that was a very exciting moment. This is a good one to capture on film. To give you a little bit of, just to show you, and I think, oh, there's a pointer here. This is where the Ntulia Primary School, and I'm going to show you some more images of that in brief. So we built the first primary school for 600 children here in Ntulia. The following year, we built a clinic at the same area to meet those first needs of the village. And then as soon as we finished that, everyone said, well, the children who go to this primary school need a place to go to secondary school. So then we actually renovated a secondary school where these children now go that was crumbling into the ground, and that is right about here. We then, and this is not a pin on the map, but we then renovated another nearby primary school that was also crumbling into the ground, and I'll show photos of those very quickly. And we are now moving on to this next project, which is building a girls' school. So this is an image of the Ntulia Primary School. What was so important to us was that collaboration, but also sustainability. And this is where I think that the work that we're talking about also intersects so nicely with the Earth Matters show. And also, there was a creation of a new school model, which was really breaking the model of a long sort of school that had been built in Tanzania since the colonial era. This is our team. So we're very proud of this local team that we have that has been trained by dear friends of ours on the ground. We've been working with this team since 2007, and we now have people who are so well trained in their craft of masonry or bricklaying. Pamela and Scott are going to show many images of the team, so I won't talk about them too much, but they are phenomenal, phenomenal. So we have built very sustainably. These are the bricks that were fired to build the Ntulia Primary School, and when I went through the Earth Matters exhibition in the museum, I kept thinking about the earth and the way that the bricks from the school were built from the earth at the site of the school, and they were burned with rice chaff, which is the byproduct when you're milling rice. So there's no deforestation. So we've been very proud of the way that these bricks have, actually here's the rice chaff, the way that these bricks have been burned. We are also very proud of our composting toilets, which you are all very welcome to come and try out. This is a really great sustainable way to not continue to pollute the groundwater. So this took a lot of great work with environmental engineers at University of Dar es Salaam. Here's the school campus. It's a 14 classroom building, and each grouping of 4 classrooms creates an area of, or like a family homestead area, and it really is a new school model. Here's a girl, these are the teacher houses. There's a girl running to school a little bit late. Inside of one of the classrooms, and these are actually, there are flags from 54 different African nations, very lovingly painted by 3 of my Bates students, who went and volunteered. We've had several Bates students volunteer at the site. Happy kids. And we were also so happy to have the former president of Tanzania, Jakaya Kikwete, come to the school to open the school, and the district wanted to show off the school that we had all collaborated on, and people were absolutely, in the village, were just beside themselves. They had never had a president come to their village, and it brings tears to my eyes even remembering it, how happy this made some of my mamas there. This is the secondary school project. I won't go over this whole list, but we did a lot. We renovated this classroom block building, an administrative block. This is a new science lab that we added. We added teacher housing, beautiful composting latrines again. It's just the science labs, kids at work. So this is now where the kids who go from Ntulia Primary go to secondary school. We then renovated Shilanona Primary School, and this is a school that was also a school for 540 kids that was also crumbling to the ground. So this is a before and this is an after on the right. This is a before of an interior of the classroom. There were up to 100 kids just sitting on the floor, on a dirt floor without enough desks. And now we have fully cement-covered floors and desks. I'm not going to talk too much about this because this is the beautiful new Sakuma House prototype that is done by Pamela and Scott from their time living in Tanzania in 2013, but they're going to talk more about that. We were so thrilled to meet Pamela Hawks and Scott Tees through friends of ours, and they spent 3 months in Tanzania in 2013, and I was able to spend about 10 days or 2 weeks of that time with them then. And they did so much research and designed an entire girls' school from that time and forward, and we've now broken ground for that school. And this is the Milembe Girls Boarding School. And this is meeting a need. This is actually not just a village who's come to us for the assistance, but it was actually our Tanzanian government district who we've partnered with on every one of these projects. And they came to us and said, we really need a girls' boarding school in the district. There's not a girls' boarding school. And I didn't realize, I was talking to somebody and said, oh, I'm working on a boarding school project. And I hadn't quite put it in the perspective that that sounds very fancy compared to, it's a boarding school. They were looking at it from a very American perspective, but this is actually a school that will help girls have a safe space, and it will really meet the needs of at-risk girls. Only 1% of Tanzanian girls graduate from secondary school, and that is the need that we're trying to meet. If these girls have a safe place to live, we can help these girls get an education. And the bottom line is that educating one girl has a resounding impact and can help change the cycle of poverty. So here are girls who are going to Mwaniko school, but many of these girls walk sometimes 2 hours to get to school and 2 hours to get home. And then when they do arrive home, they have to do all of the family chores, all of the cooking. They often, I've heard horrible stories of girls experiencing sexual violence on the roads to get to school. This is a girl at Milembe now, and these are girls running a little bit late for class at Ntulia Primary. This is a good moment to switch to Scattergood Design with Pamela Hawks and Scott Tees. Thank you.
Thank you, Aimee and Mark. About 5 or 6 years ago, Scott and I were in the auditorium at the Portland Public Library listening to Aimee and Mark, and we turned to each other and we said, we want to do something like this. And it was not an immediate connection, but in the way that things only happen in Maine. In the January, February of 2013, we spent 3 months in Tanzania volunteering our services. And I was really struck as Anne took us through the Earth Matters show at how wonderful it is for us to be here, because so many of the things that you just touched on in about 10 minutes, we found to be really true there too. I mean, first and foremost was the idea that although we were volunteering our time, what we took away from that experience was so much more than we could have ever imagined, and that's only been confirmed again by the 4 weeks that we spent there just in January. I think also the chance that we had by living in Ntulia next to the health outpost that Aimee and Mark and Africa Schoolhouse built gave us such an incredible insight into designing for that culture, living without running water and electricity for 5 days a week, learning how to cook without refrigeration, seeing the rhythm of life there, knowing what it feels like to be under a metal roof when it's 100 degrees out, seeing what it's like when the roads get impassable during the rains, witnessing this incredible landscape that Aimee has talked about with these incredible granite formations, the rice paddies, the pastoral landscape was really an incredible chance for us to rethink ourselves as professionals. And we bring about, I think, I don't want to say how many years of experience between us, but it was also a chance for us to rethink everything that we thought about. We both have experience with education, whether it's Phillips Andover Academy in Massachusetts or Marshwood High School. But as Aimee said, when we were tasked with designing a boarding school for 400 girls, we had to find out what that meant in Tanzania. And so the first thing we did, the gift that we had was to have Africa Schoolhouse's truck and Africa Schoolhouse's VP for Community Relations, Jefta Kishosha, at our disposal to drive over 200 kilometers, looking at a wide range of boarding schools, talking to head teachers, especially talking to the girls, asking them what was important to them being in a classroom with a teacher, which is something that we sort of take for granted, but in Tanzania is not a given. What do you want to be when you grow up? An accountant, a lawyer, an astronaut, just the possibilities that they saw for themselves and the gift that they knew they were being given by being in secondary school was really extraordinary. We looked at a range of schools from the school at the bottom, which was built in the 1960s, which reminds us a little bit of Florida and has wonderful, incredible site work and landscaping that we took notes on, to schools up in the northern part of the country, which have been built in the last 2 or 3 years and are seen as national models. We looked at classrooms, which you see in the top, at auditoria and cafeterias and spaces that were serving many, many uses, from exams and education, and also after-hours activities for the girls. We looked at dormitories, which are mostly bunk beds, and spaces for the girls to do their own laundry, and also kitchens and food preparation, which again is very basic, but incredibly appreciated by these girls who typically can't always be sure of having a meal every day. We had community meetings. I think the commitment that Aimee mentioned to working with the community is one that's been very much a part of both of our professional careers. We faced some real challenges because although everyone, particularly in the government level, is very fluent in English, our Swahili and our Sakuma is limited to good morning, good afternoon, thank you, and goodbye. And we know that everyone was very polite and very cooperative during our meetings, but for the 10 days that Aimee was here, magic happened. And so when you start the meeting by greeting everyone in Swahili and checking in with them, that's when they really open their hearts and talk about what their dreams are for the school. And we found that also we were using tools that were familiar to us from grad school, like colored pencils and balsa wood models, that made a lot of sense there when we couldn't use computers because we didn't have electricity during the week. But we're also very much appreciated by the people that we were working with. So this taking balsa wood over and building teeny tiny models of all the buildings and letting the district officials and education staff move things around and think about what they wanted to have on the site was really important. We did the kind of analysis of the site that we would do anywhere, while recognizing that the sun is on the different part of the equator there than it is up here, beginning to see what happens with air movement to deal with the temperature differential, and also recognizing how important drainage is in this area where the rain may not come for 9 months, but when it does, it comes in force. We developed a plan, as Aimee said, for a school that will ultimately house 400 girls with the possibility of 4 grades and then the possibility of 2 additional grades for advanced levels. And we knew that in the process, this was not going to be built overnight. That although the Natulia campus that this was going to be an even larger undertaking. And so we needed to be able to think about phasing and be able to create phases that would be complete in and of themselves. So you see here, I'll show a series of ideas about enlarging the campus essentially class by class as dormitories are built and classrooms are built, teacher houses, and facilities like auditorium. So this is actually the phase that's underway. Scott will talk a little bit more about that. Here, adding a dormitory and part of a dining hall and kitchen, adding another class and another set of dorms, more teacher houses and classrooms, another phase adding administrative buildings and additional space in the dining hall, completing the dining hall and the dormitories, and then a few images of the buildings, still very much in concept form. The idea of having Africa Schoolhouse has had a great commitment to design and sustainability, and that's one of the things that's been so exciting for us. The idea of having buildings that were memorable and different from what you see everywhere was a key part. The dining hall, which you see from the main highway between Mwanza, the second largest city in Tanzania, and Dar es Salaam, is something that the district official said, is that a boat or a fish? And we said, I think it could be either, and each of them has very nice symbolic connotations as well. The administration building, the place where everyone will come to tour and to be introduced to the campus, was an opportunity to think about roofs and ventilation. The typical classroom space where we're thinking about good natural light, good ventilation, security for the girls. The dormitories, where we're also thinking about trying to create a sense of community, keeping the grades together and giving the girls a chance to feel together as a group in this very new place, a place where many of them will be coming from very far away. And then one of the other important things that we learned was, of course, what it's like to build there. And I'm going to turn the podium over to Scott to talk about that.
So how is it that a couple architects from Maine can travel a third of the way around the world and be effective in their design process? And the answer to that is, as I think you're hearing both from Aimee and Pamela, is that we had the opportunity to really understand the community. We had an opportunity to understand the people, both the administration and more particularly the students, really understand their aspirations, their goals, their sense of who they were in the world, before we picked up a pencil. We also had this wonderful ability to learn about the construction industry, again, before we began the design process. And so we felt for the first month we were there, this is 3 years ago, we became energized in as much as we were like sponges, just learning about this community that we were to begin the design. So what can we bring to it? We can, I think one of the first and most important is we can create a place, a learning environment where the girls want to be, where they are comfortable, where they feel safe, where there's a strong sense of place. And I think the site plans certainly give you a good impression of how we address that. And then we looked at the specific needs of building materials. We used as much as we could, as Aimee pointed out, the materials that existed on the site, with the exception of the steel that comes in probably from China on the roof. Everything that we used was as indigenous and as local as we possibly could use it. Oh, that's not going to do it. We traveled quite a bit, as Pam said. We looked at situations like this is a kitchen in the teacher's house, no ventilation. We learned about how buildings went together. We drew on our resources. Back in the 70s, I had a wonderful Land Rover, not unlike this one, a little bit better shape. But it had what was called the safari roof, which was a double roof to dissipate the heat of the sun. So one of our thoughts was, why couldn't we apply that to the houses? And so one of the first projects we did 3 years ago was to create a new teacher's housing using the existing one as a prototype, but adding what we call the double roof, which again was very much like the Land Rover that I showed you in the previous slides. Again, learning about the construction techniques by not only listening to them, but actually rolling up our sleeves and working with the crew. The form, in this case, this is a double roof, a roof within a roof, so that the heat builds up and gets dissipated before it finds its way inside. We also thought, we started looking in the previous slides of the soft forms that you see throughout the landscape. It's only the colonial buildings that have harsh gable roofs. So by fracturing the roof, we were able to create a softer form for the teachers' houses, which now, with some refinement, has become our prototype. This is our site from Misungwi School. There are two existing buildings on it, which you can see in the foreground. On the extreme left is a prototype. We decided about 3 or 4 months ago to use this storage building as a way to convey our design ideas and construction techniques, or I should say refinements, to the construction crew. So this building right here gave us the opportunity to do just that, walking through connections, One of our goals was not only to dissipate the heat, but also to bring more natural light in, particularly on a cloudy day. During the rainy season, we wanted to still have light in the rooms. And so we're using an upper portion, which I'll show you right here, as a way to bring light into those classrooms, as opposed to, this standard gable roof would simply come down like so. Also, water collection is very important. So we have this gutter that's up high enough that allows us to collect water and then distribute it by gravity within, these are classroom buildings. Laboratory buildings. Windows were problematic. We saw a lot of broken windows. So glass did not seem to be the most appropriate material. And along with a corrugated metal roof, there was corrugated fiberglass. So 3 years ago, we did some prototypes, as you can see here, and we then decided to refine that as a window. As opposed to about $500 and some a window, we thought we could do it for less than half. And in fact, we're doing it for about a third of that. This was a mock-up that I actually made here, and as I was constructing it, I was using my iPhone to take pictures of the various stages, so we put together a manual so that we have a pictorial manual of how to assemble. Basically, it's a louver, it's like a jalousie window, only the louvers are larger, they're translucent, they're unbreakable because they're fiberglass as opposed to glass. They let maximum amount of ventilation in, and when it rains, you can close it and still get light through it. You saw in the previous designs, some of the shutters were completely opaque, which means no light was able to get in when the windows were closed. So hopefully, these are now under construction, incidentally, in Tanzania, after working with a crew and doing several additional prototypes. You can see the process here. Upper left-hand corner are actually some custom brackets to get them to operate more smoothly. Again, building the prototype in Africa. This is about 6 weeks ago. And here they are, 3 shots. Again, to the left is the closed window, and then partially open and then fully open closest to you with Pam waving in the background. And the crew. And part of the real rewards here are really the people that we're working with. They are amazingly skilled, but not used to the protocol, the process that we're used to. So the challenge has been to communicate our ideas, to get them on board, to have them buy into it, and have them produce something that I think is as complex. This not only is a window, but you can see the additional bars. It's a security window too. There's a laboratory. So we had to come in and make it as impenetrable in terms of break-ins as we could. Here's the prototype that I was telling you about, and it gave us an opportunity to talk about the panels. Here's the fiberglass panel being used in the upper portion as a clear story with large overhangs. And then basically just working with in this case it wasn't a brick, it was a concrete block that was built on site. Again, great crew constructing the trusses, assembling the trusses, again in the prototype, and then moving over to the main roof, and you can see that sort of convoluted truss that I showed you earlier under construction here. The amazing quality of stonework that the first time I saw it, I was sure that they had set up a formwork and worked against it, but they were actually working just with a stretched line, but do very, very beautiful work. So these are the foundations going into the labs, and this is essentially a sequence of the slab, the site cast block on top of that, we call it a lintel beam that runs around it with reinforcing bar, and the first truss being assembled in the upper right. And this was sent to us yesterday. So they're under construction. This is one of 3 buildings. So we'll have biology, chemistry, and physics in terms of the laboratories. And this is the great crew that I can't wait to get back and work with. Thank you.
Well, I want to just start by thanking four remarkable presenters. Thank you for those exceptional presentations. I am amazed at how much territory you are each able to cover in a relatively brief set of remarks. And I imagine that, like everybody else in the audience, I have lots of questions, things that I want to hear more about, and maybe I'll just say a quick word about process. We asked Pamela and Scott and Mark and Aimee to do the impossible, which was to encapsulate an extremely complex project in short presentations, precisely because we thought it would be so much fun to unpack some of the assumptions inherent in what they were doing, and to probe each of them to speak a little bit further about the project. So I have the pleasure of kicking off the conversation and perhaps also giving each of these exceptional couples an opportunity to interrogate one another. And we'll then open up the floor for conversation. I'm going to start off with a little bit of a selfish question, and I hope you'll all indulge me. One of the things that Frank and I were commenting on as we were preparing for today's program is that we happen to have engaged two husband-wife teams, which is something that the two of us have a little special interest in and a little bit of experience with. And so on that note, I would actually like to start off, if I may, by asking you each to speak a little bit about your own collaborative processes as partners. What does it mean to collaborate, of course, with this exceptional community in Tanzania, communities, but also what does it mean to work as creative partners yourself in what is clearly a very complex endeavor?
You were just there.
That's such a great question. Just as background, Scott and I had actually worked professionally before. We worked on the public library in Bath about 15 years ago, but we'd not worked together. And in fact, we both left our firms in 2012 and were proposing to work together. But this was definitely a test case, and a test case under some challenging physical circumstances. But I think what we found is that I couldn't have done it without having him there. I know each of us brings different skills. Scott's ability to problem solve and get things done and develop details is extraordinary. And I think we each bring different things and different eyes and different ears. And I think that in a situation like this, the ability to be hearing the same conversation and getting different things out of it, depending on what you hear, is really, really valuable. And so I just say I think I couldn't have done it without him. So,
That's very sweet. There's no question that we recognize our balancing skills, and I think that's our strength, and it certainly isn't a weakness, but because we process many things, and certainly design is in there as well, differently, that sometimes we do have challenges in terms of conveying our values, our commitments, our ideas. But we recognize that, and once we engage in a problem solving together, I think we're absolutely awesome. It's a word I don't use, but we've been able to accomplish a lot that I know I certainly couldn't do alone or without Pamela.
So nervous. This is a really hard question. I think the word values, Scott, that you mentioned, I think at the end of the day, for Aimee and I, and I'll speak a little bit, it's like the honeymooners, that, how to say it, I think we get along so well because at the end of the day, we'd much rather do something for somebody else than ourselves. And so at the end of the day, we both really believe that in our work life, our family life. This project enabled us to do something we never thought we could do ourselves. but together with this kind of set of values, to embark on something that was pretty insane initially, to be honest. When we began the project in '08, the recession was in full blast, and we raised $600,000 in about 2 years to do the first school. And we look back and we were so foolhardy. But at the end of the day, I think the notion of the invitation from the community and how many people that this was going to serve, and then the opportunity to work with the community, like Scott and Pam said, with this group of best friends and family, that for us it was just a natural thing to do. It really was more about how do you find the time to do it.
Wow, I hadn't thought. I'm like now, there's this analytical piece of my brain that's going, wow, like how have we done this? We've worked on other projects before, and which we love doing, and there's something really co-creative that happens when you have something that you're working toward together, which feels very exciting. But I think that with this particular project, there was this other element of these people who we cared really deeply about, and I think that became the driving force, I think, for both of us, more so than this like co-creative part, like, oh, let's go make this thing. It was, let's go help our friends. So I think that was another element in there. And the other thing that I was thinking about too is that I don't know that we would have done everything that we had done if we hadn't really encouraged each other and had such a drive to help this really big family of about 200. It's a family. It's a big village, but it's a 250-person village. And then many neighboring villages. But we would not have jumped in and done it if we hadn't cared so much that this happened. So I think that's the other part. But I think, yeah.
Just the other part of the values for us, which is kind of a background, and I don't want to spend too much time on it. Aimee had just come back from Tanzania in the early 2000s, and we had quickly done some quick work, I think raising some money for a mill. And we were kind of amazed how fast our friends came up with $35,000, because the immediate need for something that was automatically going to help a community have food that year. And it was direct funding where the money came to us, we delivered it to Tanzania, and suddenly there was a mill and there was food for a community. And we realized, wow, okay, there's something here. And I think when the community made the invitation to us, we felt maybe there's something special that could happen. And we came back, and we have an annual dinner for a very close friend who died, actually now 25 years ago. And we get together as a group of high school buddies every year, and I turned to one of my friends and I said, let's do this for Josh. This community just invited us to do this project. And most of the board, besides Aimee and I, are actually my best friends from high school. And I think, again, it's back to the values of people who got together, and we became something much larger than we ever anticipated, because we had the opportunity to work with such great people and friends.
It's wonderful to have an opportunity to hear a little bit about the nature of the creative practice that you've each been engaged with, and how you have then shared that creative practice both within Tanzania, but also in terms of engaging others to participate in what this community building means, specifically with an emphasis on education. And Mark, you are generous at the outset of the day to situate the Bowdoin College Museum of Art within an educational institution, which I think from my standpoint makes it particularly appropriate to have this opportunity to talk with the four of you about what it means to build an educational institution or educational institutions in another part of the world. And I can't resist, given the fact that we are using as our framework for this conversation an art exhibition, the opportunity to ask the four of you about the role that art plays within the construct of this particular project. And in addition to art, specifically, maybe extending out of that, this whole question of the metaphorical nature of materials, which in some senses is what artistic practice helps to remind us of, at least on some level.
Multifaceted question. As somebody who, my area of specialty is very specifically East African, but also Tanzanian art. Art is, we could say what we call art, is part of daily life in Tanzania, but it's often very ephemeral. And there are many objects that are used in daily life and daily practice that I do research about, but they are often something that may be put outside to decay, often something that may be used within a family compound, or maybe it's worn, but when it wears out, it wears out. It's an ephemeral piece. There is a beautiful sculptural tradition in Tanzania that is slowly, well, there are many different sculptural traditions, but the most traditional of those are not highly practiced today, with different religions coming into play. So that's sort of a little bit of one part of the question. But another part that I was thinking about is, well, art is not a subject that's taught in the government school at the primary school level, or even at the secondary school level. So it's something that even children sitting down to do drawings, they may do it, but it's nothing that's actually practiced. So it's been very interesting to, both when we've visited in Tanzania, go with our kids and do art projects. Kids love to do art projects there. So it's, whenever we have had volunteers going, it's always something we're looking for. So if anyone wants to go and volunteer and you want to come and do art projects, you're most welcome to come stay in our volunteer house. So that's another piece. I actually have in my office at Bates really beautiful drawings that were done by friends of our daughters that we've sent art kits for them because they love making art. And I've seen a progression in how they've drawn over the years. It's just beautiful to see. So that's one answer. And another is to see the deep level of appreciation in a government district meeting with a community that may not have been to many museums or seen a lot of art, but to see their appreciation for the art that Pamela and Scott have created. And as they mentioned, the small-scale models of buildings, and to see people's wonder, and even at a village meeting, to see people take scaled models of architectural structures and have so much fun with them. So there's a deep appreciation. So that's...
Well, I think our response somehow wants to relate to the art of architecture. And that, to be honest, has been one of our biggest challenges. That we perhaps went there thinking that this would be an opportunity for us to try something new, certainly to experience something new. We knew that Aimee and Mark and Africa Schoolhouse have been incredibly supportive of very innovative design, very sustainable design. But we also know, as Aimee pointed out, that they are also incredibly committed to a sustainable process, so that we didn't build the schools. They have this crew now of trained masons and carpenters, and they build the schools. And it's been a process for us over 3 years to get to know what their capabilities are, and in some ways to realize that they are our hands. And that what we normally expect in terms of a process of communicating design and getting design built is something that we need to be very different and very deliberate about. That one of our big discoveries, which we suspected after the first project but was confirmed this time, is that the crew don't really read drawings. I mean, it's actually a conversation. Some of the conversations we have are not so different from the conversations that architects have about contractors here in the US. But the reality is that, which is, they didn't look at the drawings, they built from the ones from, I sent 4 weeks ago, and, and complicated by communications and technology and everything else. But we have a group of incredibly dedicated masons and carpenters. The carpenter's never been to school. So not only does he not speak English, but he doesn't read, and he's actually never taken a mathematics course. So geometry and those things are something that he, I think, knows intuitively, but he doesn't know in the same way that we do. And so when you talk about trying to center a window in a wall, or make 4 or 5 equal openings, that's it's something where the thing that we've discovered is that so much is really best expressed by doing it. And that's where Scott's ability to build prototypes and be there with them and talk about, the best way to hammer something is really important. That said, and sometimes it feels like we're having to really restrict our design. And I would say that we've seen some amazing design projects done by schools and fabulous designers in Africa, sometimes at significant costs. And when we talk about our 3 labs, which are being built for $60,000, $20,000, yeah, $20,000 a building, that's not something that's at all within the realm of reason here, even in the US. And that's really important. These guys are being paid incredibly wages that are very significant, although by our standards they are amazing, so that the foremen get about $400 a month. That in Tanzania is actually a middle-class wage. You know, in our standards, it's completely different. But what is being done is that to build crews which are getting experience with new kinds of materials and new techniques. For me, the takeaway about the Sakuma Form house the 2 teacher houses that we did at Shilanona is that actually several members of the crew did double roofs on their own houses. And that I think that already people are coming on the site and seeing those lab buildings built, which are very simple but have very beautiful proportions, and saying this is something that's different than we have anywhere else. And even though they're incredibly simple, they are, I think, going to make a difference. And for me, as an architect for public buildings, that's always been important, that I know that the buildings that we do, whether it's a library in Bath, Maine, or Old Orchard Beach, that we're investing in something that's going to be, maybe for some members of the community, the most beautiful and important and significant and substantial structure that they go into, and that's really important. So, I don't know whether you want to add anything.
I think on that note, I may open the conversation to our audience and invite each of you to offer reflections, to ask questions of our guests. Yes.
Thank you all for doing this. It's been fascinating, really. And I was very struck by the thatched roof building that appeared in one of the early photographs, and then by your high-tech double roof. And I wanted to ask if there was any conversation in Tanzania about the virtues of those 2 approaches, and if there was any dialogue about how they relate environmentally and architecturally to one another.
Well, the wonderful soft form that you see from the thatch, it dots the landscape, and along with these wonderful rock outcroppings, really communicates, for me anyways, that this is a very hospitable place, a very welcoming place. And it just flows. And when you see a gabled roof sitting on it, it's you could call it counterpoint, but it's really discord to my eye and my sensibility. And that was one of the reasons we moved in that direction of what we call the Sakuma Form. The problem with the thatch, of course, is that it has a relatively short life period, 5-6 years, and it has to be redone. So, unfortunately, when you look at the cost of a metal roof, just a standard corrugated metal roof, and you play that over time, even inexpensive labor, it's the go-to material. And what we tried to do, obviously, was to combine the tradition, the soft form, with, as you say, more high-tech material. Environmentally, the original building, I'm sure, and we've been in the traditional huts in the middle of the day, and they are certainly cooler than the reverse radiation that you get with the corrugated metal roof. So I'm feeling pretty good in terms of what we were able to accomplish. I'm sure it's not necessarily the answer, because we are building 2 roofs, and we're asking ourselves as we move through the campus, well, do we do the double roof here or the single roof or a variation of the metal roof, or is there another way to dissipate the heat? So we're going to keep asking those questions. I mean, at the end, what we're trying to do is to create a learning environment that is as conducive to the process of learning as we possibly can. And if we can lower the temperature within the classrooms by 5 degrees, I think we're accomplishing something. If we can increase the light level, first of all, the problem with most of the existing buildings, they either have shadow, no light at all, or where it streams in, it's very, very, very bright. So what the corrugated fiberglass does is to diffuse and start to dissipate, so you don't have the high contrast within it. And that one, the first slide I showed of the window we did 3 years ago starts to suggest that that is really a very effective way to bring light into a classroom. In other words, not just a window, but a diffusing window. So we're going to keep doing it. And for us, that's where a lot of the architecture with a capital A starts to happen for us. So it is more than simply recognizing a huge need and feeling very good about it. And it's more than passing on our knowledge of construction to this crew, as Pam said, who have not gone to school. And so they're learning as well, so they can carry that on to the next job, whether it's to use the double roof that we concocted, or simply going through a procedure how to raise trusses, which is that last one they used. Well, it would take me another 5 minutes to go through that, but there seemed to be a very practical way to get those trusses up there that I suggested. They used it, and apparently it worked out very well. Presumably, because it saved time and the trusses arrived in place in a lot better condition because they were not flipped over and over, which is what they did in the first one, that there's that learning process too. So there's a wonderful sustainability story on a lot of different levels to what we're doing, and that's very rewarding.
It's a really good question. We signed a memorandum of understanding with the government, and also when it's appropriate with different villages that will be participating and wanting to be active in the process too. With each project, the government dedicates 20% of the costs, or equivalent in terms of donation and use of the district, the great big district dump truck, or we're hoping in this project at the girls' school that they might help with some of the grading of the land, and that could be counted toward their 20%. So there's always a working collaboration in that way, and sometimes because of government funding and lag time and other things, we have waited sometimes up to 2 years to get that 20% commitment. So there's a little bit of, there has been the commitment to wanting to collaborate both financially and in terms of other resources from the government. In terms of, it is a government school. It's something that as a board we talk about all the time. We would love to see as a board our better education happening in these schools, more commitment from teachers. In some of the schools there's something that's done in very rural areas, it's called chalk and walk, which is that the teachers go into the classroom and they write, like they fill up the board, and the kids are almost kind of locked in the classroom, and they are invited to write that in their notebooks, and like again and again, and then teachers just go home for half the day. So it's, when I visited on, like, when there's days and there's not a teacher in the classroom and it's a chalk and walk day, which, if they don't know you're coming, it happens. And it's just, there's a lot of days where, I have to tell myself, okay, there's kids who are getting an education who wouldn't be getting an education otherwise. So there's ways that it's happening that we have to reevaluate our mission as a board. If we're providing the infrastructure, but we are actually, as outsiders, trusting the Tanzanian government that they are educating the children in Tanzania, it requires a lot of, sometimes, we're not going in to fix the whole system, even though there's times when it would be lovely to fix the system, but we're outsiders to that system, and it's important to trust that the government will find ways. And in other, maybe that you would think you had something to add,
Yeah, I mean, I just was, adding what Aimee is saying, we've done okay raising funds, but at the same time, it's been very difficult because we actually are interested in infrastructure and collaboration, and nobody seems to want to really fund that except for friends and family. What everybody wants to fund is programs. What this community doesn't need is a new program. What they need is a well and a good school to go to. And literally, if we get 20 years out of these buildings, that means 20 years of kids got to school, and maybe the community will have more money, or the government will have more money later, and we win the day. But I'm with Aimee. It's tough. When we're as small as we are, you try to do what you do really well, and we would like to be able to do more. But at a certain point, if we spread ourselves too thin and getting involved in the programmatic side, it's not what we're good at, and it's not really what the community needs right now. But your questions, we conceptually, practically talk about that all the time in terms of our board and our mission and what we're trying to accomplish, because it's a real concern.
Well, if you've educated a whole generation of people, that's amazing. So congratulations.
Thank you. It's a great question.
I believe that Mark said something about this being a village, something in the beginning. I'm sorry, could you speak up? A healing village in the beginning, and I was wondering how and if art and healing and education are collaborating with each other in this town and in this endeavor.
Thank you for the question. I'm going to pass it to Aimee because it's exactly her expertise in where all those things connect. I don't think this one is good. Do you have green on that one?
I thought that wasn't working. So what was really important to us, because this is, and we do have a volunteer house right next to this village, and it's just a very beautiful, special place that's dedicated to healing. It's a village of about 250 people, and there are other surrounding villages, but this one is really dedicated to the healing practice that they learned from one of the slides that Mark showed early on, someone named Nyumbani Shilinde, who was known in his Swahili nickname was Mungu wa Pili, which means second God. So people believed that he had very godlike healing qualities. And people would come from Dar es Salaam to this very tiny village, or from all over, sometimes other countries, to this village to get healing. When we had this request from the elders in the village for the school and the clinic, Mark and I, along with this board of friends, were very concerned that some of our discussions were around wanting to maintain also helping everyone maintain the cultural values. And in some rural areas of Tanzania, there is a distinction between kids who are educated and then their elders who are not educated. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily break families apart, but it creates a hierarchy of education over non-education. And we were very concerned about that. So we had many village meetings about that, and included, all of the elders were part of that discussion. And the elders who are our family, and now Pam and Scott's family, sign at the bank with a thumbprint. So they have never been to school, and they are the ones who are valuing the education. And they are traditional healers. So that's also, and art in terms of this particular village, drumming and music, and also the creation of empowered objects are so much a part of this particular village's traditional culture, and those are still widely practiced. So my last trip to Tanzania last May, I saw kids who had been at the early morning, every Thursday morning they beat the drums in the village, and they had been at the early morning drumming, but they had their school uniforms on underneath their traditional black clothing, and as soon as the drumming was over, where they were very large drums, little ones playing the drums, because they were being taught, it's part of their traditional culture, they threw off the black clothes, and they went running to get to school on time too. So it was, and that was a very beautiful moment for me, because those are children of people that Mark and I have known since they were teenagers and who never went to school. So they are children of parents who do not read and write, and they are learning to read and write. And that's where I get back to like, oh, that's our mission. That's what we're doing.
I think we'll take one final question because time is getting away from us, and I'm gonna go with the lady with the stripes, if that's okay. But I know there are maybe other questions, so we'll invite you all to come down and ask personally.
Hi, thank you. You spoke of the need for security at the girls' school, and I was wondering specifically with respect to Tanzania, from what and from whom are you protecting these girls?
Not the kinds of things that we've seen in other places. I mean, I think that, as Mark pointed out, Tanzania is remarkable for the incredible harmony that has existed, which is not to say that we don't see mosques in the countryside and madrasas, and know that if we're not building public schools, other people will build schools just as they have in other communities. I think this is much more of a, frankly, an issue that you might even deal with here in the US, which is security of the girls who are living from people who might come onto the campus from outside, and that goes into, there's a wall around, there will be a wall around the campus, there'll be a gate, there'll be security guards 24/7. We think a lot about sight lines, that one of the things I like about the windows that we're thinking about is the ability to see into classrooms and make sure that nothing's happening there that shouldn't be happening, and those things happen here in the US as they do in Tanzania. I mean, people unfortunately are human everywhere. So those are the things that we're thinking about. Unfortunately, not the level of security that we might have in some other countries.
I think it's a good question, but in Tanzania there hasn't been that the same level. I mean, we have all heard and followed the stories of Boko Haram in Nigeria and what's happened to schoolgirls there, and that's not happening in Tanzania. But we have heard, and in doing the research before getting ready to build the girls' school, we collected so many really, really difficult stories of girls. I've talked to girls who've been attacked on their long walks to get to school, and there's a lot of shame around sexual violence in Tanzania, and people, and when I was talking to the girls, and these are girls that I got to know, so they were comfortable enough telling me their stories, but there were no men in the room, and they were nudging one girl to tell more of her story, and these are stories, when I've said, and what did you do? What did your family do? What did the teachers do? And they said, oh, I didn't tell anyone. So there's a lot of shame around sexual violence in Tanzania, and so it would be to create safe space for girls, both to protect them from dangers on the long walks to school, but also just not even as much a danger, but just the fact that girls, when they're living at school, they actually can focus on their studies, which is it's a luxury to get to study and focus on studies. When they're home, they're the ones who, after 2 hours walking back home, they also are walking to the well for another hour to go fetch the water, to come back home and then to start cooking. And I've talked to girls who get, maybe 4 hours of sleep because of the long walks and all the chores they do. And they don't even get to their homework. Wait, that was a sad note to end on. No, we could say something happier.
You know, and also at the end of the day, with the girls' boarding school and some of the stats that Aimee put up, they're pretty tragic statistics about young girls in school, but it's also an incredible opportunity to make change. When you see statistics, how 1 more year for each girl in school, how 2 more years, 3 more years can totally change their life and really change that cycle of poverty. At the end of the day, committing it to girls seems to us to have been the sustainable growth of what we're trying to accomplish, is also now getting to the point where we read the data and understand that this is the biggest need, particularly in our area, is getting young girls educated. And the biggest change we can do, no matter what, is to provide a safe space for young girls to go to school and stay in school.
Mark and Aimee, Pamela and Scott, thank you both, or thank all of you for the extraordinary work you're doing in Africa and for the extraordinary inspiration it provides us here as we try to build our own safe spaces to educate the next generation. And we thank all of you for having been with us this evening. It's always wonderful to have such a committed and engaged audience. So thanks to everyone, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.